When I asked my teacher to leave equations on the board for an extra minute, he refused and said, "If you're so special, use your phone." When I did, he banned phones in class. I didn't say a word. That was 5 months ago, yesterday. He was packing his car, red-faced and shaking. When I was in high school, I struggled with dyslexia, but I never let it stop me from dreaming big. I knew I needed to work twice as hard just to keep up, so I set my mind on working 4 times as hard, and it paid off. By senior year, I had a 3.9 GPA, was in multiple AP classes, and was laser-focused on getting into MIT. Physics was my favorite subject, but Mr. Davis, my AP physics teacher, seemed to have it out for kids like me. From the start, he made little comments about my disability. Like, when I asked him to leave equations on the board for an extra minute, he refused and told me, "If you're so special and can't keep up, use your phone." So I did. But whenever I snapped photos instead of copying notes, he'd bark. Phones aren't allowed in class. One day, I stayed after school. My voice shook as I laid it all out. He was violating school policy by denying me an education, and dyslexia didn't mean I was dumb. I thought maybe he'd understand or at least back off, but he didn't say much. He just crossed his arms and stared, as if I were wasting his time. I left thinking I'd made it worse. Turns out I had. The next week, during midterm review, I asked him to clarify something on the board. He looked around the room and said, "Okay, everyone, I'm going to use smaller words and speak slower for Alex's benefit." Then he launched into a slow, condescending explanation, exaggerating every syllable. The class chuckled. My face burned so hot I felt dizzy. When I tried to ask a follow-up question, he sneered, "This is why some people should consider community college instead of aiming for MIT." Just like that, in front of everyone. I froze, couldn't move, couldn't speak. I wanted to disappear. Then, without planning it, I stood up, walked to the front of the room shaking so hard I thought my knees would give out, and said that dyslexia has nothing to do with intelligence, that Einstein had it, that Hawking had a disability, that I wasn't the one who should be ashamed. He just told me to sit down and get back to the review. I wasn't sure what to expect next, but what he did I never saw coming. He pulled me aside and said he didn't mean to hurt me, that the world wouldn't always offer accommodations. He told me he was almost done writing my MIT recommendation letter and that we should move on. I didn't believe his apology, but I needed that letter, so I said, "Okay." For a week, I was on top of the world until I got called to the counselor's office. She looked like she didn't even know how to start. Then she handed me a copy of Mr. Davis's letter to MIT. I read it and was horrified. He praised my admirable persistence despite cognitive challenges, but warned that I might struggle with independent work, saying MIT's resources would be better used on other students. I didn't even feel the floor under me. The counselor said MIT had already responded they were passing on my application because of that letter. I don't remember walking home. I collapsed in my room and cried for hours. I didn't eat. I barely slept, and I replayed everything. Then something inside me broke, not in a way that made me give up, but in a way that made me furious. If he treated me like that, he probably did it to others. So I got to work. I started recording everything. I got him on tape making snide remarks to a freshman with ADHD. I interviewed older students who said he'd tanked their confidence. One girl quit STEM entirely after his class. I tracked grades and saw that students with EAPS consistently earned lower marks in his class than anywhere else. Then I struck gold. I recorded him laughing about ignoring accommodations because those kids won't succeed in real science anyway. I compiled recordings, interviews, grade analyses, copies of school policies, and a full timeline of what happened to me. Then I made 2 versions of the file, one for the school board, principal, special director, superintendent, and PTA heads, the other for a local education reporter. I sent them anonymously early Monday morning. By lunch, the school was in chaos. Mr. Davis was pulled from class, a full investigation was launched, and parents started calling. The reporter's story ran that week and it blew up. The whole community was talking about disability discrimination. Mr. Davis was enraged, determined to take me down, Rumors about me began circulating. I ate my sandwich in the library, pretending to study while refreshing my email every 5 minutes. The first reply came from Sarah Chen at 2:30 p.m. She wanted to verify some details. I asked to remain anonymous but agreed to answer questions via email. By the end of the day, the entire faculty had been called into an emergency meeting, and students were dismissed early. As I walked to my car, I saw Mr. Davis storming out, red-faced, throwing his briefcase into his trunk so hard I feared for the window. I ducked behind a tree until he drove off. That night, my mom called me to dinner with a strange look. "Did you hear about Mr. Davis?" she asked. I tried to act surprised. "No. What about him?" She said the school had called parents of all his students. They wouldn't give details, but he was on administrative leave. I nodded and focused on my pasta to avoid her gaze. "Weird," I said. She studied my face. "Alex, you wouldn't happen to know anything about this, would you?" I hesitated. I wasn't ready to tell her what I'd done. "Not yet." She didn't push it, and my dad changed the subject. The next day at school was chaos. Everyone was talking about Mr. Davis. The substitute, Miss Rodriguez, seemed nice but clueless. She handed out worksheets and told us to work quietly. By Wednesday, Sarah Chen's first article ran under the headline, "Investigation launched into alleged discrimination at Westlake High." She didn't name Mr. Davis directly, but everyone knew who it was. On Thursday, I was called to Principal Warren's office. My heart pounded. I expected an accusation. Instead, she wanted to hear my experiences with Mr. Davis. I told her everything: his classroom comments, his refusal to accommodate me, and the recommendation letter that sunk my MIT application. I didn't mention my investigation. She thanked me and assured me the school was taking appropriate action. By Friday, a second article included anonymous quotes from former students and statistical grade discrepancies. The school board announced a special meeting. I should have felt victorious. My plan was working, but instead I felt empty. MIT remained out of reach. That Saturday, Miss Peterson emailed, "Alex, I contacted MIT's admissions office, explained the situation with Mr. Davis's letter, and asked if they'd reconsider your application. They've agreed to review it again, this time with a letter you wrote and one from Mr. Rodriguez. I believe you have a very good chance." For the first time in weeks, I felt hope, but the drama wasn't over. Rumors spread that I'd cheated, manipulated classmates, and didn't deserve MIT. I tried to focus on my upcoming interview with Dr. Patel, an MIT alumna, but nerves and rumors threatened to derail me. On the day of the video interview, she began by saying, "It takes real courage to stand up to authority when it's abusing power. That's the integrity we value at MIT." My nerves settled, and the rest of the interview went great. She never asked about my dyslexia. She treated me like any other applicant. Then I saw Mr. Davis's public Facebook post entitled "Students Abusing Accommodations." It had been shared hundreds of times by parents and teachers. My dad called the principal. The post was cyberbullying. At school the next day, some baseball players knocked my books out of my hands and taunted me. "Need extra time for that too, retard." I shoved one back. They shoved me into lockers, and a crowd formed chanting, "Fight." Mr. Rodriguez arrived just in time, broke it up, sent the players to the principal, and took me to the nurse. While cleaning my cut, he said, "The hardest part of standing up for what's right is in the first act. It's continuing to stand when everyone's trying to knock you down." That weekend, I decided to go on the record. I met Sarah Chen at a coffee shop, gave her all my evidence, and recorded our conversation. She promised the article would run Sunday. On Sunday, Sarah's front-page story, "Student Speaks Out," the real story behind Westlake High discrimination case, named me and Mr. Davis, detailed every allegation, and announced his termination for policy and legal violations. I felt relief, pride, and fear. Monday, I walked into school to applause. Casey and dozens of students and teachers cheered. Some former critics apologized. That afternoon, Miss Peterson called with news from MIT. "You've been accepted full scholarship." I hugged her and called my parents. My mom cried. My dad was bursting with pride. The last weeks of senior year were transformative. The school implemented new teacher training on accommodations and hired a consultant to review policies, asking me to help. Graduation was triumphant. Principal Warren shook my hand and whispered, "MIT is lucky to have you." That summer, I worked at a local science center designing accessible experiments. At MIT, in Physics 101, my professor announced, "Anyone needing accommodations, let me know privately." When I did, he said, "No problem. We'll make sure you have what you need." In that moment, I knew I belonged. I still have dyslexia. I still work harder than most to process written information. But now I know it doesn't make me any less capable. And I know that standing up for yourself and others is always worth it, especially when it's hard.